This video is for AQA GCSE Business Studies Unit 2 looking at legislation. Now I'm going to do two videos on legislation. The first video is going to be based on legislation for the labour force, and the other video I'll do is based on legislation for protecting consumers. So you just have to remember that legislation is just through the laws that have been put in place to ensure that certain stakeholder groups are being protected and they're not being exploited. So, for example, if we think about the labour force, all the legislations that have been put in place for firms to obey should be there to kind of make sure that the employees are being treated fairly and they're not at risk or they're not being exploited by the business. So the first one we're going to look at is simply the Health and Safety at Work Act, which was created in 1974. Now, as it says here, the Act sets out the general duties which employees have towards employees and members of the public. So even though this is for employees, but it's also for anybody who just enters the workplace, because if they enter the workplace and there's health and safety risks, then obviously that person will be at risk as well. So what they should do, the business should make arrangements for implementing the health and safety measures identified as necessary by the risk assessment. So there'll be quite a lot of admin involved, where they have to create out risk assessments for maybe different rooms within the site. They might have to appoint people who are actually responsible for health and safety. They'll have to carry out health and safety training as well. They'll have to make sure that there's emergency procedures put in place. Clear information is provided and communicated to everybody who would actually enter the site. And they have to work together with other employees sharing the same workplace. So in terms of it's quite obvious what the benefits are of this Health and Safety Act. It's to make sure that there's no accidents, no injuries which are related to the workplace. Now, the benefits of a business of carrying this health and safety out is to avoid any industrial accidents, because that could cause absenteeism in the workplace. It could cause poor media scrutiny because of a bad reputation of not looking after its employees. It might actually put off potential candidates in the future from wanting to get a job within this firm. However, the issues with this health and safety, and you'll find that there's a bit of a trend here. What tends to happen is when you have to implement this legislation, it does come at a cost, and it will be expensive. So it'll be expensive to hire somebody who's responsible for health and safety or to do the health and safety risk assessments. It'll be expensive to maybe train certain employees to be health and safety trained. So it will come at a cost, but you just have to weigh, is the cost worth it? And obviously in terms of some of the law cases that can be brought against firms, if they fail to follow the Health and Safety Act, then you'd say it's definitely worth it. Another legislation we're going to look at, and this is more focused at the workforce, and this is to do with minimum wage and national living wage. So this is the most recent one that was the government announced, with April 2017 going on to April 2018. And actually recently in the media there's been a few businesses that have been revealed to be paying less than minimum wage. Wagamama's, TGI Fridays, even Stoke Football Club. They've all been in the news recently for not paying their employees the right wage. Sports Direct again have in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you a couple of videos based on minimum wage. The first video is just going to show you the difference between minimum wage and the national living wage, because the national living wage is starting to come more into practice now. It's very similar, but there's just a couple of differences.
Britain's new so-called national living wage is the biggest government intervention in the UK labour market for decades, since the days of Tony Blair and New Labour. So what is it, and why does it matter? Here are the three things you need to know. First, it means Britain's lowest paid workers will receive big pay rises, not just this year, but every year between now and 2020. The national living wage is really just a new minimum wage rate that applies to everyone aged 25 and over. But it'll be higher than the current minimum wage, and it will go up more quickly. The government plans to start it at £7.20 an hour on April 1st, then push it up faster than average pay, so that by 2020 it will be worth 60% of median earnings. That's about £9 an hour. By that point, a lot more people will find themselves on the minimum wage. Between 2015 and 2020, the number of workers aged 25 and over who are on the minimum wage will treble from 1 million to 3.3 million. The second thing you need to know is that Britain is not alone. Countries all over the world are either introducing minimum wages or pushing them up, in an attempt to do something about stagnating living standards. Germany introduced its first ever minimum wage last year. Meanwhile, some US cities like Seattle are increasing their minimums to $15 an hour. So how does Britain compare? At the minute, our minimum wage is in the middle of the pack. It's not the lowest by any means, but it's nowhere near as high as places like France and Australia. The national living wage will change that picture. By 2020, the UK will have one of the highest minimum wages in the developed world. The third thing to know is that no one is entirely sure how this national living wage will actually work out. It all depends on how employers react to the fact they have to pay people more. They could just accept that they're going to make less profit, or they could put up their prices. Alternatively, they could give workers more training and time-saving technology so that they're more productive. That would make the higher pay more affordable. The worst thing would be if they just make do with fewer workers because they can't afford to keep employing all of them. That could lead to higher unemployment. So far, Britain's experience with the minimum wage, which it first introduced in 1998, has been good. It's increased pay a lot for people at the bottom of the ladder, without causing any job losses. But both optimists and pessimists agree that the national living wage is a step into the unknown. Sarah O'Connor, The Financial Times, London.
So from this video, we can see that there's definitely similarities between the national minimum wage and the national living wage. Now, the national living wage is still being explored, and there's talks about it might change depending on where you live. So, for example, in London, the national living wage might be higher in comparison to, I don't know, for example, Yorkshire. So it's still open to kind of debate. But we can all agree that the reasons for a national minimum wage or living wage is to try to reduce relative poverty and try to improve standard of living for people, especially the lower income, the lower skilled, to make sure that they can support themselves and they can support their families. So that's the biggest benefit. And I suppose just to make sure that there's fairness as well, if they're doing a job that they're getting paid adequately for that job. The main disadvantages of the minimum wage is just the business's reaction, as the video said. How are businesses going to react? Are they going to cut recruitment? Are they going to stop recruiting as many workers because they have to pay higher wages? Could they actually make cutbacks and make redundancies and actually cut staff? They're the fears of what might happen if there is an increase in minimum wage because of the impacts on profits. Now, as I said before, Wagamama's is an example of a company, as well as TGI Fridays, as well as Stuxy, that have been proven not to pay minimum wage. There is another example, and this also breaks some other legislations in terms of, again, health and safety, in terms of treating the staff well. So I'll share this video about Mike Ashley now.
Mike Ashley, the billionaire tycoon. And then there's his workforce, some of whom he's failed to pay even £6.70 an hour. Pile 'em high, sell 'em cheap, but behind the cheery humming, there's been a scandal brewing about the culture of Sports Direct.
I really am not enjoying this.
And today came the admission.
Do you accept that the company was effectively paying workers below the minimum wage?
On that specific point, for that specific bit of time, yes. Some things have come as a bit of an unpleasant surprise, yes.
Could you tell the committee what those unpleasant surprises are?
Well, first thing that I looked at was the bottlenecks, and that wasn't our best ever day.
What Mr. Ashley is referring to is security checks at Shirebrook that were adding so much time to staff working hours that they were effectively being paid £6.50 an hour, rather than the legal minimum of £6.70. The results of the undercover investigation have led to a formal inquiry by HMRC, confirmed for the first time by Mr. Ashley today. But it's not just pay. Union Unite today submitted an explosive dossier packed with details about a company culture full of bullying, where work conditions were likened to that of a gulag.
These are conditions that are just unacceptable in 21st century Britain. And if you don't stop it here, of course, the problem that you get is that this then extends itself across the economy.
So we can see that examples of the minimum wage is happening quite frequently at the moment, and it's up to the government to, I suppose, crack down on it and make sure it doesn't happen. It also trade unions to help out as well. Now, trade unions are organisations that are there to represent employees and their rights and to kind of protect and I suppose negotiate on behalf of employees. So it really takes the government and trade unions to try and crack down on this type of behaviour. And the final law that we're going to look at is to do with maximum weekly working hours. So it's called the Working Time Directive. And within the UK, as it states here, you can't work more than 48 hours a week on average, normally averaged over 17 weeks. So this law is often known as the Working Time Directive or the Working Time Regulations. Now, you can, as an individual, you can opt out of it, and often some roles you would opt out. So, for example, if you're part of certain the emergency services, the police, the armed forces, where it's I suppose you are expected to work longer hours because of the responsibility of the job, so you can opt out of it. But again, this is just another example of a law that's there to protect labour. Now, I could mention many more. There's hundreds of laws to protect labour, but I just thought I'd go for a couple of examples just to show you what legislations there are in place to protect employees' rights.